you're building that resilience and creating reflexes about how things should happen. And at the beginning, I can tell you, you need to own each what needs to happen.
Welcome to a brand new episode of the M&A Mastermind podcast presented by Cornerstone International Alliance. I'm your host, Nick Olson. On this show, I get the opportunity to talk with the brightest minds in lower middle market M&A. Together, we discuss industry intelligence, deal management, shared successes, specialized expertise, and much more. If you serve the small to medium-sized business owner, this show will offer you tactics and insights you can use and implement now to become a master in M&A. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a brand new episode of the M&A Mastermind podcast. Today's topic is one of the most overlooked risks in M&A, cybersecurity due diligence. In the lower middle market, cyber risks often go unchecked, yet a single vulnerability can significantly impact valuation or derail a transaction. Joining me is Philippe Flichy, founder and principal of Cykur, where he helps organizations align cybersecurity with business strategy. Philippe brings experience from global firms like SLB, Baker Hughes, and Weatherford, along with his work with InfraGard in partnership with the FBI. He spent years helping companies understand how cybersecurity directly impacts enterprise value, especially in high-stakes transactions. Philippe, great to have you on the show. How you doing?
Thank you so much, Jonathan.
All right. So we're talking about cybersecurity due diligence, but before we dive into that topic, for our listeners' sake, tell us a little bit about your background and your area of expertise in cybersecurity.
Yeah, my experience in cybersecurity is pretty vast, mostly on the strategy that goes along with cyber risks. And I actually tend to talk about digital risk these days more than cyber, because people tend to not realize what the digital risks are exactly the same way we don't pay attention to electricity. And it's only the time that the electricity goes down and we says, whoops, we have all those things working with electricity. Guess what? It's exactly the same thing with digital. We don't realize that everything we're using today is digital. So the idea is to really try to understand and the impact on the bottom line of the company to identify where should we pay attention. And indeed, in the M&A transaction, it can have an impact up to 30% of the value of the company.
Wow, that's pretty significant. So in M&A deals, where do you most often see cybersecurity risks hiding that advisors might overlook?
So typically you have compliance and regulations, making sure that they're following those things. Technical depth and vulnerabilities, and we can dive down, but I don't think we want to be too technical. Data security risk and operational security gaps.
So for an M&A advisor thinking about cybersecurity, due diligence and really diving deep into it and understanding the gaps, the risks and things like that, how is that different than, maybe your traditional financial or legal diligence that you would do in a transaction?
Yes, it's very different, and it's really the new way of approaching the evaluation of a company. So basically, we tend to look at it with a kind of 6 pillars in assessing. You have the governance and leadership. You have the technical architecture, the data protection, security operations, compliance and legal, and business resilience.
What do you mean? Can you further explain maybe what business resilience means in your pillars?
That's how you make sure that your company continue to live if something happens. So there's 2 aspects to it. We in our jargon, we talked about before the boom and after the boom being when you're attacked. And so before the boom is making sure you have the right backups, you have all the diligence that goes around that. And resilience after the boom is how can you restitute the backups, how you can respond to things. So typically we look at the incident response plan, which is the checklist on what to do when something happens. And there's a lot of things that are not technical.
In your 6 pillars, Philippe, you mentioned business resilience. Can you expand a little bit on what you mean by that term?
For sure, business resilience is how you prepare for something happening to the company. So you have work that needs to be done before so that you have the checklist, such as an incident response plan. And for sure, you typically do backups, but can you restore your backups? A lot of things that goes around this. And really, it's not only technical because it's also how you prepare to understand what impact it has on your business.
And how you handle that incident, right? I think you reference it as a boom.
Right. So you have typically before the boom and after the boom. So the boom being the attack itself.
Yeah.
And you have to prepare before in order to be able to sustain after. And one of the things we typically do, and you have to do also in M&A, is try to understand how much analysis they have done to understand what is going to impact the most the company. So if you're using different software like billing and you cannot bill anymore, that's a problem. If you're in industry and suddenly your assembly line doesn't work anymore, you can't even produce anymore. So we try to understand what kind of impact. We work a lot with CFOs to analyze that risk and quantify that risk, because suddenly from something that is a virtual ID, it becomes something very real.
You have an example of a company you were working with that dealt with a boom or a situation that maybe you needed to mitigate or get them back on track and really exercise that business resilience.
There's some very big examples that exist, like when Marriott was acquired by Starwood, they figured out that actually they had 500 million records that were breached pre-acquisition. And as a result, they had to pay a fine of $124 million. So of course, we're talking about large companies, but that applies to any level of companies.
What would you say are a couple of things, maybe three things that you'd recommend buyers or advisors assess pretty quickly or look at to understand, maybe their cyber risk, or are they at risk? Are they covered? Or what are some things they can look at to really understand the health of their cybersecurity?
Policies and procedures, are they reviewed? When was the last time? I went to some companies and the policies were like a one-page document. So yes, they had a policy, but how worth is it? I mean, you really need to identify what the people can do and not do. And there's a lot of different policies. We have a whole checklist. Any of your auditors that really want to have this full checklist, I'd be happy to share that with them.
Yeah, I was gonna be my next question, because in due diligence, when you're talking with a company going to market looking to sell, you have due diligence checklist. Would you recommend that the checklist you're referencing, the things that they should look for, add that right into the due diligence
Oh,
process?
absolutely. Absolutely. That once again, that's how you're going to get those 30% extra. Nowadays, digital risk is considered a tangible risk,
Hmm.
not intangible. And we tend, going back to what we said originally at the beginning of this interview, people tend to think of digital as something totally material, but it's considered a material risk.
So you've said digital risk, and compared to cybersecurity risk, what are the differences there?
Digital is anything we do, is from your phone, is from the computer you're using. It's this new electricity that allows us to run a business, as opposed to cyber that is more, then you think more about firewalls and antivirus and things like that. But there's this whole notion, and that's why policies and procedures, technical documentation, compliance records, contracts and insurance document is extremely important when you're reviewing the company you want to acquire.
Hmm.
Or if you want to sell, make sure that you have that. the duck in order.
Mhm. Where does AI, artificial intelligence, that's all the rage right now? What should our listeners know about risk with AI?
It's growing dramatically. Actually, the latest I've heard is that now there's more risk from AI agents than actually humans. So let me explain. So of course, those are the training we have within InfraGard. So they try to keep us really up to date. What's happening is that you have a lot of AI agents to which you're giving rights to do different things. And suddenly the question becomes, how do you manage the access of all those agents? Typically, when I present what I is today, I tend to say, those AI agents, consider them like little, not little, interns. And actually, they tend to replace a lot of interns in real life. And the challenge is that if you don't know what this little intern robot has access to and what has been doing, then you fly in the dark. And those AI tools now are subject to attack from the bad actors. You've heard plenty of news recently, so I don't think there's any need to go into specific ones.
Yeah, I mean, if and what are your thoughts? You talk about processes and document, policies and procedures and things like that. A lot of people now use AI to develop, their policies or procedures, how they're doing that sort of stuff, and you know, protection obviously. Because I feel like with AI right now, it's like this this can save us time. Maybe it saves us, jobs, but we can be more efficient, right? And you're feeding it a lot of sensitive information potentially, whether it's for your own personal M&A firm or for your clients who are business owners who have if you're inputting information into AI and they're about the business you're representing, that's obviously a risk itself. Is there anything else we should know about best practices on just protecting ourselves with the information we're putting into AI right now? That because I know that's one of the biggest things we talk about within our alliances. We know AI is a real thing. It's very powerful. We can't really run from it or avoid it. We got to embrace it on some level. But I'm really nervous about feeding it any information because I don't know where it's going to go. What would you say to people who would say, something like that as to maybe they're hesitant or to use it just because they are nervous about the risk?
You are right on the money. So you have to make sure that whatever LLM you're using is controlled and has access to specific data. So the core level, like anything on the internet, if it's free, you are the product. So anything free, forget it. Anything you're putting in is going to enhance the system itself. So be very careful about what you share in terms of information. And even when it's contained within your company. So some people started deploying Copilot from Microsoft without having the right data management within the company. The next thing you know is that a clever user has been able to figure out all the perks of the executives in the company and how much the CEO was paid.
This episode of the M&A Mastermind podcast is powered by Cornerstone International Alliance, where leading M&A firms come together. As part of this international network, you get access to global opportunities, over 200 M&A experts, enhanced collaboration and knowledge sharing, and some of the best M&A tools and resources available, all to help you take your firm to the next level. Ready to join this exclusive network? Visit cornerstoneia.com/new member today.
So it didn't go outside of the perimeter of the house, the office, the company, but still, it's very dangerous. I mean, you're sharing data that you may not be wanting to share.
Now let's kind of talk a little bit more in depth about the sale, the M&A process. When a business owner is looking to sell, looking at valuation. You said if you have, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you said, cyber security can enhance value as much as 30. Can you kind of dive into that a little bit more, deeper to help us understand how, why that is, how that is, and what we can do as M&A advisors to kind of unpack that to maximize the value that we are getting for our clients?
So there's quite a bit here.
Yeah, I just
Figure
asked you
out
like four questions at once.
So one aspect is what we call the supply chain risk. So it's the third party breaches. They've been up by 235 since 2019. So and all those smaller companies tend to be that third party risk. So if you're bringing that into another company, suddenly you're moving that risk in that larger company. Data assets are actually usually pretty much 90% of the value of the company because it's all the processes, it's all the way you do things. The intellectual property per se is only 10 to 20% of the value of the company. So once again, when you look at all those process procedures and how you do things, the contracts you have in place, cyber insurance is a big one. You tend to have, like any insurance contract, a few pages are building a very rosy view of things. And then behind you have 30 pages to limit those three first pages. So be aware of what you actually are insured, because maybe you're not doing the right things to be insured.
What are some, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna ask, what are some questions us as M&A advisors could ask our clients to start unpacking, what they have in place, maybe some areas of opportunity where they can, get better coverage, or just to help them understand some of the risks that their client's company is facing based on where they are currently. Just how do we unpack, where they're at now, and how, to understand if there is an opportunity to, deploy something better and, ultimately increase the value.
So you have the policy itself, the coverage limits, potential exposure, the exclusions and limitation, claim history. You definitely want to know if those guys have had claims in the past. Has their premium tend to trend quite a bit? Then that's an indicator that the insurance company doesn't feel very comfortable about it. Then the coverage itself, is it first party breach cost only, or are they actually protected if a third party, if they're victim of something that arrived from a third party? We talked about business interruption. How much are you covered about the business interruption? Ransomware, up to how much are you covered to be paid for paying the ransom? If you're subject to fines, what are the regulations for that industry? Those are kind of things I would start to look at when discussing cyber insurance.
What when you look at, and so when are you thinking people have this conversation? So M&A advisor having this conversation with a business owner, is it, early on in the process where now we're signing an engagement agreement to take them to market? Is it at that point? Are we waiting until we've got a signed LOI and now we're going and kicking off the due diligence process? How early in the whole grand scheme of the process should we be having this conversation with our clients?
So actually, you can start by looking at public data. You have a lot of information that exists. So I would advise to start before, even when you're the same way you're doing the high level sorting of what companies you're interested in. Within that, you can certainly do a lot of research on with the different tools on the internet to understand what the exposure of that company, hire someone to look at the dark web and see what's available on the dark web on this company. So that really doesn't cost you much, and already you have an idea about the company. And then early on, if you can start requesting certain things like access to maybe the insurance policy, and so before going too deep into what you're asking, policies and procedures are something that they should be open to share at some point.
Right.
And that will tell you a lot. If there's no revision, if there's no tracking, if it takes 2 pages, if your incident response plan is 3 pages, you're in trouble.
Yeah. Steer clear of that client or help them get a better policy. So would this conversation make sense when you're looking at doing for the client, the valuation and understanding the value? Is there anything correlation to doing the valuation and understanding their cybersecurity risk and according to the value? Or is that something that you just kind of unpack as you're going down the process?
Whenever you can start having a look at their compliance level, their technical debt. So do they run any software that is outdated or don't have the updates or those kind of things? Operational gaps, data risk. Those would be the 4 pillars I would definitely start getting information early on. And as you progress in the conversation with them, you can enhance and have more. But I wouldn't decide to have that only at the end once I've done the rest of the work, because there's really ways to start looking at things progressively over time.
What about, would you recommend companies get a third party, cybersecurity professional, coming in, consulting, implementing, and putting in place these kind of policies for them?
Well, that's something we do. So yes, I would.
So if there's a buyer, a seller out there who doesn't have a great policy in place and they want to work with you guys, what are some of the things that you would do with them and for them to make sure they're covered?
Or the first thing we would look at compliance. So what kind of process procedures they have in place, incident response plan, the insurance they have, communication plan in case something goes wrong, and really so what we do with some of our clients is what we call tabletops. So once they have a solid incident response plan, then you need to rehearse. The brain, think of it the first time you drove. I think all of us, we were very self-conscious. It was really on the forehead and so on. And the more you drive, the more maybe it goes too much in the reptilian brain and you don't pay enough attention. But creating those times where you rehearse certain things that could happen, you're building that resilience and creating reflexes about how things should happen. And at the beginning, I can tell you, everyone look at each other and think, it's you, no, it's you, no, it's you. You need to own each what needs to happen and have an orchestrator, someone that is in charge of distributing the task and aggregating the challenges. But I cannot tell you how incident response planning is important, because the saying used to be, it's not if, but when. And now we're saying it's not when, it's how. Everyone is at risk. There's no doubt about it. The thing is that as long as the hour goes to the next guy, we think that there's no risk for us. But unfortunately, we don't know when it's going to happen.
Yeah, and planning is, you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? So making sure that, just hearing you talk, it's like back when we're in grade school and we're practicing a fire drill, how to get out of the building if there's a fire. And you're kind of saying the same thing, that, we're going to test you guys as your cybersecurity, professional, and we'll see how you respond to it and to see if you need some more some more education and more
Yeah.
teaching, or
Yeah.
if you guys are in a good spot.
Yeah. How do you use an extinguisher? It's great to have an
Exactly.
extinguisher. How do you use it?
Yep. Right. That's a good point too. How do you, if something happens, what are the first steps that you need to employ to reduce the amount of exposure you have? Right.
And is the extinguisher checked and does it work?
Right.
You
Exactly.
can really do exactly the same analogy. It's a risk like any other.
Yep.
And
Yep.
you can decide to have a home without any extinguisher. I mean, okay.
It's risky. What about post close, and integration with the
Oh,
new company? What are some best practices there? Because I would imagine, if you're set up during the sale, integration might be a little bit easier, or depending on, you know, that poses another question as I'm asking you, as the seller, how do you want to understand what your buyer has already too for cybersecurity? And
so
how important is
funny
it
you
for the
mentioned
for the
that. Yeah, we actually, with one of my partner, we created another company where we actually do exactly that. We take different processes from the different companies and we figure out how you merge them and what are the impact. So you create what we call digital twins, where you simulate things, and that way you can create a better project. One thing really, for especially on smaller companies, to look for is the Joe knows everything. So typically in smaller companies, you have one tech guy, gal, that knows everything. Nothing is written in procedures or whatever. And if that person leaves during the move because they feel they won't have the grip they used to have on the new company, you're in real trouble. So that's something, when you prepare to sell, that goes back to those policies and procedures. How do you back up? How you check your backups? All those kind of things. And then the challenge is, once you've merged the two companies, you tend to have two. I mean, if it's larger companies, they have different security teams that suddenly have to work together. Guess what? With all those AI tools, the bad guys can easily figure out the companies that might be taken up for grab. And they start infiltrating those companies. They stay put, they wait for the integration, and they're within the big company.
So that's the thing where these hackers, these cybersecurity people, bad people, we'll say for lack of a better term, are they're looking at M&A transactions as an opportunity to get in there as they're looking to integrate, one way to the next, or meshing them together.
Yeah, I forgot the percentage. It's huge.
Wow, I didn't realize that. But it makes sense because now they're a little bit vulnerable. They're transitioning from one company to a connection between two separate businesses, and what are they going to do? And are they going to have something in place, before they sign on the dotted line, or is it going to be a 60 to 90-day process after they've already sold?
And on top of that, a lot of companies, when they are put on the market, they try to, skin so that take all the fat out to make sure that they look better. Well, usually cybersecurity takes a hit. And then when they're together, once again, if they very quickly, you don't have a new incident response plan and people get to know, usually you have different systems. That's something we look a lot at, is what are the different systems? How are you going to integrate all these new things together?
Right, right. And yeah, that's, like I said, that's a vulnerable position for both companies to be in, and to be prepared on both sides, I think would minimize that risk, hopefully, and make that transition a little bit smoother.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything that last question, Philippe, and this has been amazing. Anything that you've experienced in your career working with, Fortune 500 companies and their security practices that would translate well into the lower middle market space?
Well, there's a lot. Actually, the reason we started Cykur was really to help to really bring the methodologies and the approach of large companies to the middle market, I decided to start Cykur because I was on the board of a company and they asked me to start having a little bit of a fractional exec role to go look a little bit deeper inside. And what I didn't know that what I saw was actually often the case and really abysmal approach and process is key in those things. You basically in cybersecurity, you have the technology, the process, and the people. And you need to approach absolutely the three of them. So the technology, people tend to think about it, but it's all updates, firewalls, all those things. The process is all those diligence and figuring out how you do things. Would you fly a plane where you know that the pilot doesn't have a checklist?
No, I would not.
And then the last point are the people. And so that means training, getting those incident response plan. The human factor is huge. They always use, we have a whole webinar on what to look for, but typically they're looking for to think that you're going to get a bargain. They're going to pressure you over time and they're going to scare you.
In the people side, you don't want to fly a plane when the pilot's not trained to fly a plane. Philippe, this has been amazing. It sounds like, you got some resources that would be good for our listeners that maybe we can link in the show notes. We'll definitely put those in there. But really appreciate you joining the M&A Mastermind podcast today. Great information on cybersecurity. Where can our listeners find you, your company, and the great work that you're doing?
Well, the website, so cykur.com. And if they're more interested in the process things, it's processbots.ai, bots plural. So processbots.ai.
Okay. Well, I'll put those two links in the show notes as well. Again, Philippe, thank you so much for joining this episode of the M&A Mastermind podcast. Make sure to share, like, and comment on this episode. Pass it on to anybody you think might benefit from our conversation. Make sure your business owner clients understand the cybersecurity risks that might pose their company, especially when they're looking to exit, integrate with a new buyer to make it into the next phase of the company's life cycle. But make sure to like, subscribe on this episode in our channel, wherever you find podcasts every week. A new episode airs on Thursday mornings. Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much, Alton, for your...
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the M&A Mastermind podcast, and a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, Cornerstone International Alliance. If you enjoyed today's discussion, don't forget to like, share, and comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. We'll be back next week with more insights, strategies, and real-life experiences to help you take your M&A game to the next level.